Hello and welcome to the Avrum Rosensweig show. Of course, my name is Avrum Rosensweig, and I am just delighted to be here with you today. Thank you so much for joining us. This show is all about really fantastic, magnificent people with inspirational stories. And I think today that we're setting the bar even higher than we have in the past. And I say this because my guest today is Harvey Brownstone. Harvey, welcome to you.
Thank you so much, Avram. It's lovely to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. And you're going to get to know Harvey over the next hour, but suffice it to say that Harvey Brownstone is a very driven, passionate, compassionate human being, type A, who has switched his careers a couple times and done magnificently well in both of them. He was a lawyer, he was a judge for 26 years, and then ultimately he left that and launched a new career as an interviewer. And today he is the interviewer of the stars. And just recently, his show was determined to be in the top 15. I think he's number 12 by Worldwide Entertainment News. And that is terrific news, Harvey. So well done.
Thank you so much. That's hard to believe when I hear all that. But yes, I'm one of those people that keeps reinventing myself.
You know what's really interesting is I listened to a number of your interviews, and you did an interview with Robert Wagner. And of course, Robert Wagner is in his 90s now, and he's known for movies. He's known for TV series. He really is the actor of actors, a very, very debonair, handsome man. After you introduced him, and you said, "Mr. Wagner, is it okay if I call you RJ?" He said to you, he said, "You know, Harvey, I consider you a friend, so of course." And that's the nicest, the best introduction I've ever heard. How do you feel when people say that to you?
I've gotten used to it. I'm really known for my introductions, and I do them for two reasons. Number one, I want the guest to know that I'm a professional,
Yes.
that I do my homework, and that I know their careers inside out. Because there are a lot of interviewers out there, a lot of podcasters out there who are very amateurish, don't do a professional job, and these celebrities know that. And the second reason I do those introductions is because I want my audience to decide if they want to watch the show. You know, who is this person? Now, in the case of Robert Wagner, everybody knows who he is, but many of my guests are not famous. And so I give detailed introductions so that people know who they are. And I have to tell you, almost every time the guest will say, "Wow, thank you so much for that introduction. I loved it. I really appreciate it." And it makes me feel great. And it sets the framework for an interview that will go deeper than what usually happens. And that's my goal, is to go deep.
And Harvey, where does that come from? I think that it's safe to say that you want to go deep, but I also believe, based on the interviews that I've listened to, that you're a very compassionate human being, and that I think you want to make people feel good. Would that be accurate?
For sure. I certainly hope I'm compassionate. I was known as a judge for conveying that. And I think that my interviewing style very much comes from my time as a judge, for sure. I know how to ask questions. I know how to frame a question in such a way that will trigger the answer that I'm hoping to get. And yes, I want my guests to feel good. I'm always amazed that some of these big stars who you would think have big egos and already know how wonderful they are, you'd be surprised how many of them are actually very fragile and really appreciate someone who gives an interview that's enthusiastically supportive and warm. And that's what I'm known for. And that's what my audience wants.
How does that fragility play out? Can you give me an example of a star whom you have interviewed who may not have had a very high profile in the last 10, 15 years? What sort of fragility are you speaking of?
Well, the most obvious example, two come to mind. The first is Tony Orlando. Tony
Yes.
Orlando has been a star since the late 60s. And I was giving him a pretty standard interview for Harvey Brownstone. And at one point, I rattled off a number of major accomplishments in his career. And he started to cry. He broke down and cried. And unlike your show, ours is not live. It's filmed, but not live. And we had to stop the interview. He was sobbing uncontrollably. And it took him a little bit of time to compose himself. And we left enough in the finished product for the audience to see what happened and how moved he was. And I was really very touched. I didn't realize his sense of self-esteem was so low that he really appreciated being treated by a media person
Wow.
as a major talent with a good voice and real talent. And the second celebrity that comes to mind was Taylor Dane. That just happened a few weeks ago. She's a tough New York Jewish woman, child of Holocaust survivors. She's had to survive the music industry since the 80s. She's certainly known for being very tough. And I mentioned to her how much the gay community appreciated the support she's given us. And she broke down and cried. She was so overcome with emotion that when I thanked her at the end of the interview, she couldn't speak. And we left that in. I wanted people to see that she just couldn't even talk. So that's two examples. But I've had, we've done over 350 shows. And I would say a good number of them, the guest has been quite overcome with emotion. And that's something, of course, as an interviewer, it's a real feather in your cap that you can get a celebrity to break through the veneer, through the Hollywood public image. But it's also very touching for the audience to see that these people are human and they have emotions and they have fragility. And that's part of my goal, is to show that they're just people like us.
Have you ever cried or sobbed during an interview or on the bench?
On the bench, I did cry a few times. There were a few very powerful cases, mostly in family court, where the tears flowed. I've had a couple of very emotional adoptions. I've had some very emotional child protection cases. And in criminal court, I've had cases where victims and offenders had reconciliatory moments where enormous forgiveness was demonstrated in the courtroom. And yeah, I've been moved to tears, not often, but yes. On my show, we had one guest who's Martin McKenna is his name. He wrote an amazing book called The Boy Who Talked to Dogs. This was a man who was very badly bullied as a kid by his father in Ireland. He ran away from home at the age of 13 and lived with a pack of wild dogs in the streets of Dublin for 3 years. He learned how to communicate with dogs. He has become the world's most famous dog whisperer. He now is in Australia. He has a major television show there. But this book, The Boy Who Talked to Dogs, really moved me so much that I invited him on my show. And we talked about the abuse that he endured at the hands of his father. And he broke down and cried, and so did I. And to this day, that is the most emotional, most powerful interview I've done, is Martin McKenna.
Were you sobbing? Did you have to turn away? Did you excuse yourself, or did you say, "I'm just so touched"? What? How did?
I cried, and there was a moment when I thought maybe we should take a break.
Yeah.
But what was coming out of his mouth was solid gold. This was so powerful. I knew that there's no way we should stop the cameras from rolling, and I just kept going, and so did he. And that interview has gone mega viral.
Yes.
And I wouldn't change a thing about it.
I launched a Jewish humanitarian organization called Via Hafta in 1996, and essentially we helped the homeless and the impoverished. We also did international work in Zimbabwe and Guyana. So I dealt with very impoverished individuals, very sad folk. And I heard many, many stories over my days as a CEO of Via Hafta, which is still up and running, and it's better than ever with our new CEO, Carrie. And I was really shell-shocked by the stories that I heard. I know that you sat on the bench as a judge. You were judge for 26 years. And you did so in criminal court as well as family court. I've been in family court myself. And what I wonder about you is, because you're clearly a sensitive individual, how did you manage to stay standing and to breathe with all the things that you know about life and the tragedies that children go through? An example is a 7-year-old kid who you were speaking to about which parent that he wanted to go to. And he said to you, I just want to die. So how do you manage to hold up with all that information in your head?
Well, you develop a certain kind of resilience when you deal with human tragedy. And I had to develop that early on. I mean, I'm a pretty strong person. My parents kicked me out when I was 19, when I told them I was gay, and I found myself homeless. I'm an only child, so there was no family. And I had to become a survivor. And so once I got the job as a judge and began to see so much tragedy, I developed what I like to call emotional Teflon. You know, you don't soak it in. It bounces off. You can convey compassion and empathy, but you don't let it penetrate who you are because it's too toxic. And so I actually found it fairly easy to do that because of my own circumstances, you know. And when I would get people in court, sometimes I would have people in court say things like, well, you don't know what it's like to be poor. You don't know what it's like to be on welfare. You're rich. You're a judge. What do you know about my life? And I would say, I was on welfare for 5 years. Long before you were born, I was on welfare. So don't tell me that I don't know what it's like to be poor. And they would look at me like they couldn't believe it. And I remember when I was interviewed for the position of being a judge, because in Ontario at the provincial court level, you are interviewed by a very intimidating panel. I said to them, I'm sure I'm the only candidate you will see who's been on welfare, because most people that are judges have lived very privileged lives. They've gone to private schools. They've had the best of everything. And frankly, some of my colleagues wouldn't know a poor person if they fell over one.
Yes.
That wasn't my situation. And I was always on the outside looking in. So you develop a certain amount of resilience that I think I have, and that allowed me to live a very balanced, happy life, despite the fact that it was, you know, you don't see happy things in court other than adoptions. There's nothing happy in family court or criminal court.
Were you scared in front of that panel?
Yes. Yeah. I had been told my whole life that I wasn't good enough. When I was after my parents kicked me out, I didn't see the point of hiding that I was gay, because if the only people who I ever cared about or whoever loved me didn't want me anymore, what did I care what you thought about me? So when I got to law school, I didn't care. I didn't run around announcing that I was gay. I never made an announcement. I just lived my life and people figured it out. And I had many professors say to me, it's a shame that you've come out because you're never going to get a job. You know, this is not, now we're talking the late 70s here, but they were saying, you know, the legal profession is a very status quo profession. It's not the kind of environment that's going to be conducive to you being who you are. And it's a shame because you would have been a good lawyer. Well, I proved them wrong. Then when I decided to apply to be a judge, everyone around me said, you're wasting your time. No government is going to appoint an openly gay judge. It's never going to happen. So I was scared when I went to the interview, because I knew that it was well known that I was gay, and that I knew what everybody had told me. And I'll tell you something, Avrum, I rarely say this to people, but at one point in the interview, one of the lay members, who wasn't being very nice to me throughout the interview, said, you know, there's over 500 people that have applied for this job. What makes you think that you're entitled to it? Well, I thought that was the stupidest question, because I haven't seen the resumes, the applications of the other 500 people. How would I know if they're more qualified than me? That's their job. But I didn't say that. I just said, the difference between me and those 500 people is that I'm going to get the job and they're not. Well, everyone's mouth flew open on that panel. Yes. And I remember thinking, well, you've just fucked yourself.
Yes.
You just opened your mouth and you're done.
Yes.
So no one was more shocked than me 2 weeks later when the Attorney General phoned me and said, "You've been appointed." What I didn't know, and that I found out afterwards, at the swearing in when I became a judge, the chair of that committee was there. So I went up to him and I said, "I have to ask you, I can't understand how you guys appointed me." After I said what I said, he said, "What you didn't know is that that woman who said that to you was a real bitch, and we hated her. And she tried to destroy every single candidate. And just to bug her, we put your name forward." So you
That's a
never know in life. You never know.
you never know. I mean, the corollary, or I guess the silver lining here is, well, there are a bunch of people in your background who were bitchy to you and who were not appropriate and who were not nice to you, including your parents. But I know that you and they, came back together at some point. But the dean of your law school kind of pulled you aside and you told him you're homeless, you're penniless. How are you going to do this? And he actually worked on getting you welfare. And then that lawyer, the teacher who told you you're never going to get a job, years later, you came back and spoke and he apologized.
Yeah, he did. It wasn't the dean of the law school. It was in undergrad. Before I got to law
Undergrad.
school,
Mhm.
I had been kicked out by my parents. And I went to the dean, and he got me a scholarship. Eventually, I did get student welfare. That's true.
Yes.
But the dean got me a scholarship on condition that I get straight A's. I
It's a
would have
lot.
my tuition and my books paid for. And so I became very, very driven. It was a matter of necessity for me to be the top of the class. I had to get straight A's, or I would not get my tuition paid for or my books paid for. And so, I don't recommend rejection as a recipe for success, but I will tell you this, Avram. I definitely owe my parents a lot, because I never would have become so focused, so ambitious, so driven. I would never have had the success I've had I not experienced that, but I don't recommend it.
Can you explain that formula to me, Harvey? Your father, God bless his soul, um, was Sam Brownstone. Your mother, Odette Brownstone. Both of them are gone. And your father was worked in community in Hamilton for many, many years. Their motivation in kicking you out was not so that you should go out there and succeed. So perhaps you can explain to me how that formula works, because I too have anger towards my father, who was a rabbi, and he wasn't around, and he treated his congregants much better than he treated me. And I'm still grappling at 63 years old with trying to forgive him and move forward in that front. How does that formula work?
Well, number one, I truly believe that most parents do the best with what they have. I was a family court judge who saw the worst child abuse you can imagine. And I'm
Yes.
still telling you that most parents, except for a tiny, tiny fraction who really are evil, the vast majority of parents learned how to be parents from how they were parented.
Yes.
And I found it very easy to forgive. My father was the director of the Jewish Community Center. So he was like the mayor of the Jewish community in Hamilton. And my mother had an extremely successful ladies' wear store. So my parents had a high profile in Hamilton. And when I told them I was gay, they were mortified, mostly my mom. My dad was a social worker. So I don't think I would ever have had the problems I had if it had just been him. It wasn't him that motivated the rejection. It was my mom. And where did it come from? Shame. They were terribly, terribly ashamed that their son was a faygela. Their son turned out to be a faggot. And this was so embarrassing. I like to say that when I came out of the closet, they went in.
Yes.
They were just so terribly embarrassed. But how did I find forgiveness? Well, number one, I was determined to channel all of that anger that I had into success. I was going to do whatever it took to make them proud of me. I was going to be somebody. I was going to be a success. What I really wanted in my life was to be a talk show host. I used to watch those talk shows Merv Griffin and Mike Douglas and Johnny Carson and all of them. And I felt I was better.
Yes.
I knew I was better. I knew I asked better questions. But I knew that if I went into show business, there was no chance of success. And I needed to be a success because I needed my parents to love me and be proud of me. So I gave all of that up. I went to law school because if you're Jewish, that's what you do if you don't want to be a doctor. And I knew that if I was going to get straight A's because of that scholarship, I was going to be able to make it as a lawyer and be a success. And then when I became a lawyer, and I didn't think that was good enough to get their respect, then I needed to become a judge. So at 38 years old, I got myself appointed the youngest judge in the country and the first gay one, openly gay one. But the forgiveness that you're mentioning, Avrum, comes from, number one, knowing that they did the best they could with what they had, with the knowledge they had, with the skills they had, that they loved you and want you to succeed, but they want you to be their vision of what they want you to be, not your vision of what you want to be. But I found it easy to forgive because I did eventually earn their respect. Once I became a judge, my mother was over the moon. She used to say, well, anybody can have grandchildren and not everybody can say their son is a judge.
That's true.
And so I finally
That is true. Yeah.
I used to say my mother was so proud she had her own website. My son is a judge.com. But I think the forgiveness, you don't forgive for them. You forgive for you. You understand where they're coming from. I understand now how embarrassed they were, how afraid they were that they would be blamed, how I might reflect poorly on them because of the times and the attitudes about being gay. And I'm sure that your father deserves the forgiveness because he may not have had the capacity to show you the kind of support that you deserved. I remember a very good friend of mine was a therapist, and I arranged for her to meet my mom. And my mom was still in that time where she was having great difficulty with me being gay. And the therapist said to me, you're expecting your mother to pull herself up by her bootstraps. She doesn't even have the boots.
Yes.
That may be the case with your dad.
Yeah, no, I think that's very wise. And I think that is the case. And I look at the generation that he was born into. He was born in 1928. His brothers and an awful lot of men coming out of that time, they did not have the tools to raise their sons well. They had the tools to raise daughters, but not sons. Would you say that's accurate?
I don't think that's accurate as a widespread generalization, because my dad was born in 1925 and he was the most compassionate, the kindest. He was just overrun by my mother, who was a steamroller and who was a tornado of a human being. But I know lots of people whose parents were born in the 20s who were great fathers to sons. So no, I don't think that's necessarily true. I just think that he probably didn't have the luck to have a very warm, compassionate, loving father. I would suspect that. And I think that the other reason it's easy to forgive is because you turned out so well. So they must have done something right.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. Harvey, knowing that your Jewishness comes from a family that was actually involved in the Jewish community, and that's a big deal. People who do not come from rabbinical homes or come from homes where the father or mother is a community worker, they don't quite understand what those responsibilities are and what the culture within the house is. It's very Jewish. It's always Jewish. The phone is always ringing for requests and so on. How Jewish are you?
I'm very Jewish in my soul, in my heart, in my political beliefs. I'm a member of a synagogue, but I don't go frequently, and I'm not observant. But I identify very strongly with the Jewish community, and particularly these days, extremely strongly.
How do you identify?
Well, I am a strong believer that anti-Israel sentiment is anti-Semitism. I'm a strong believer that the Jewish community has every right to speak up loud and proud. And I make a point of eliminating, I'm sorry to say this, but I have had to eliminate a number of people from my life who have demonstrated anti-Semitic views since October the 7th, and I don't apologize for it. And I regret that I have had people in my life that I thought were supportive of the Jewish community and the Jewish sensibility, but turned out not to be.
Is it possible you overreacted?
No, I think that after what happened on October the 7th, Israel had no choice. And yes, a lot of civilians are being killed in Gaza, but that's because of the strategy that Hamas uses in order to win the public relations war. And the rest of the world needs to have their eyes open, because if Israel could eliminate Hamas without killing anyone who's not involved with Hamas, they would do it. And the proof of that is that if Israel wanted to get rid of the people in Gaza, they would have done it years ago.
Yes.
So no, I don't feel I've overreacted, but I do feel that it's very disturbing when you're at the point of watching the Academy Awards and you see a movie about the Holocaust winning an award, and the acceptance speech is a direct slam at Israel.
Yes.
I think that's a strong indicator that the Jewish community needs to band together and be very loud. There was a time when Hollywood was very supportive. It was run by Jews. And now they're wearing red pins, which basically call for a ceasefire, which is all well and good. But if you call for a ceasefire, the consequences of that are that Hamas wins, because a ceasefire means that they can't get rid of Hamas. And that is not an option for Israel.
Are you loud?
Yep.
How so?
Well, I make a point. I will not have celebrities on my show who have expressed anti-Israel or anti-Semitic comments.
Yes.
And I'm very loud within my social circle. Do I talk about it on my show? No, because my show is a celebrity interview show, and my show is about my guests,
Yes.
not about me.
You know, Harvey, I'm as aghast as anybody else about the level of anti-Semitism in the world today. And I think it's a huge shocker to generations that came after me. Despite the fact that many of them went on March of the Living, went to Poland, saw Auschwitz, or went on Birthright, traveled to Israel and saw the beauty of the country, but yet the hatred that was directed towards Israelis from various different surrounding countries. And I've asked many of my guests, including rabbis like Rabbi Korobkin, Rabbi Shlomo Gemara, very erudite individuals, scholars, just absolute scholars and beautiful human beings, wonderful souls. Why are we hated so much? Why are Jews hated so much? And so far, it's been very difficult to get an answer. Many people just don't know. Why the level of hatred against our people, Harvey?
I thought that was very simple. I mean, I was raised, this is weird. My dad was the director of the JCC, but we did
Yes.
not live in a Jewish neighborhood, and I was the only Jew in my school. And so, on top of being bullied because people, even these young kids, seemed to think I was a queer, they also beat me up all the time because I was Jewish. And
Like physically beat up? They would beat you?
Yeah, I was beat up almost every day till the end of grade 8. I had a very, very rough time in elementary school. And the reason was very clear. The Jews killed Jesus.
Yes.
I'm shocked that rabbis would tell you they don't know where anti-Semitism comes from. There's no question in my mind, having experienced anti-Semitism for much of my life. The reason is because the Jews have been identified as having killed Jesus. That's where it comes from. It's that simple.
Well, what's interesting is the countries that don't have Jesus still have anti-Semitism.
Well, there is a long-standing rift between Jews and Muslims that dates back millennia. that has nothing to do with Jesus. But non-Muslims who are anti-Semitic, the source of it came from that. That's where it happened. That's why it happened in the Spanish Inquisition in the Middle Ages. So I certainly in the Holocaust, that feeling that the Jews killed Jesus was what fueled all of what Hitler had to say about the Jews running the world and running the finances and running the economy and having a communist conspiracy. The root of all that really is this terrible myth that the Jews killed Jesus. And I'll tell you how bad it is. One day I was being brutally beaten up in the schoolyard because the Jews killed Jesus. And I kept saying, no, because the Pope, I don't know if you remember this when we were kids, but the Pope made an announcement. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, I remember this. The Pope said, the Jews did not kill Jesus. It was the Romans. It was not the Jews. So I was trying to tell these guys that were beating me up, no, the Jews did not kill Jesus. You're wrong. Let's go to Miss Parkhouse. She was our teacher. Come on, let's go to Miss Parkhouse and I'll prove it to you. She'll confirm it.
Yeah.
So in we go. I said, Miss Parkhouse, these guys are saying that the Jews killed Jesus. Tell them that it's not true. Now, Avrum, you have to remember, she's looking at a kid whose clothing is torn, who's clearly disheveled, who's clearly being beaten up. She said, but Harvey, no, the Jews did kill Jesus.
Oy, really?
Knowing that I was going to get it even worse now because the teacher confirmed that these kids were right.
Oy.
So I'm telling you that in my mind, I know that that is absolutely the source of the hatred of Jews.
You know, Harvey, I think what the rabbis were saying was something a little bit different. There's all kinds of reasons out there. It's very hard to pin one down, according to many. We're too rich. We're too poor. We infringe upon the nation, the host nation where we live. We're not part of the nation enough. I think what they were saying is we have a pretty good view of ourselves as a people, and we are good people. Our peoplehood is predicated on v'ahavta l'reach kamocha. One should love their brother and their sister as they love themselves. You know that we give huge amounts of charity and tzedakah, right? We do huge amounts of chesed, of kindness. We're at the forefront of so many liberal movements. You know, Abraham Heschel walking with Martin Luther King is a classic example we always give. I think their point, Harvey, is knowing what good folk we are. Why don't people want to emulate us? Why do they choose instead to hate us? I think that's the idea.
Well, those are characteristics of us as a people.
Yes.
But those don't explain why they don't like us. Many people who don't like Jews want a Jewish lawyer. They will only go to a Jewish doctor. They only want a Jewish accountant because they do know that there is great talent within our community in professional fields, but they still don't like Jews. I think that, you know, I mean, everything you've said is correct. I agree. I just think that the root reason is because they see Jews as having killed their savior. And I don't know how to fix that. I just don't. I think that the Pope tried when we were kids. Maybe it needs to be clarified again. But it's clear to me that if any country had experienced what Israel experienced on October 7th, there would never be an objection to what Israel's doing. But it's only because it's Jews that that's happening. And so the anti-Semitism is a horrible thing. My mother was a Holocaust survivor in an unusual way. She was in France and she was hidden by the nuns. But I consider her to be a Holocaust survivor because when the Gestapo came and they made all the boys drop their pants, all the boys that were circumcised, including her brothers, were taken. But the girls were saved. And that's how she survived. So she was never in a camp, but she was, in my mind, a Holocaust survivor. And when she left the convent, she asked the Mother Superior, you know, she thanked her. I don't know how I could ever thank you. And she said, I want you to raise your firstborn as a Catholic. So for the first 7 years of my life,
Really?
in addition to being Jewish, my mother had a woman that took me to church, to Sunday school every Sunday. And when I was 7 years old, my mother took me back to that convent in France. These nuns were very old by then.
Yes.
And they gathered them around, and this little Jewish boy did the catechism for them. And these nuns cried and couldn't believe that my mother had kept the promise, and that this Jewish boy, who was only alive because they saved my mom, delivered the catechism to them, all the Hail Marys. And then my dad put a stop to it and said, okay,
Enough is enough.
You've kept your promise. You've done enough. Well, you're confusing this boy. He's Jewish, and we are going to stop with the church. But I might be one of the few Jewish kids who knew my Hail Marys inside and out.
Right. No, Harvey, I'm just curious. You're Harvey Brownstone, the lawyer, the judge. You said you've left that all behind, but certainly that's in your blood still, I'm sure. You're the interviewer. You're a Jew. Are you at all Catholic?
No.
Nothing.
So no, I'm not Catholic, but I'm very, very grateful to the Catholic Church for saving my mother.
Harvey, I want to talk to you about your show because I'm quite fascinated by it. But before I do that, there was a question that I thought of a few minutes back about you being called up as a judge. And I had this image in my head of your very first day when I guess you climb up on a bema, like we would call it in the synagogue. It's the judges are usually a step up. And I'm assuming you're wearing these very exclusive robes and you're sitting in front of, the people whom you'll be judging. What was that like? Did you go through that process of feeling like a phony, or did you just dive right in?
I knew that when I put that robe on, that I had become Mr. Justice Brownstone. Yes. When I wore the robe, that this was not about me, it's about the institution of the court. And I never felt I was judging people, I was judging conduct. But I don't think any of us has the right really to judge other human beings. So I wasn't in awe of it. I knew that I had a job to do. And the moment that robe came off, I was Harvey again. Yes. And lawyers called me Harvey. In the courtroom, they called me Your Honor. But I was, unlike many of my colleagues who really got what we call judgeitis, it really went to their head that they were judges and expected everyone to treat them like royalty. And their egos got out of control. That's a big problem within the judiciary. I'm the first to admit it. I remembered that when I was a lawyer, and I promised myself that if I ever got that job, I would not turn into one of those judges that thought he was just the best thing since sliced bread. So I took the job as a problem solver. I was there to use the law the best way I could to make lives better for people, to bring about justice, not vengeance, but justice. Many people go to family court looking for vengeance because they've been so badly hurt by their ex. But I knew that I was in the business of doing what I could to make people's lives better and to solve problems. So I wasn't there to be a scholar. I wasn't there to be a pompous judge of other people's values or morals, but I was there to sanction bad behavior and hopefully to express compassion for victims and for offenders whose own lives were pretty horrible. I learned very early on that many people who do terrible things had terrible things done to them.
Yes.
And that there are reasons. Nobody's born a monster. There are reasons why people grow up to do bad things. I'm not saying that that's an excuse, but it is an explanation that helped me as a judge get to know them and try to find a way to lead them to some kind of rehabilitation if possible. You know, many, many people who commit crimes have substance abuse problems, or they've been victimized by the kind of abuse we've talked about, or domestic violence. And so they need healing as well.
You said that in 26 years being on the bench that you never lost a case. And the reason you gave for that in another interview was that you would actually talk to the people who were in front of you. You would interview them, correct?
Well, I never lost a trial as a lawyer.
A trial as a lawyer, yes.
As a judge, you don't win or lose. You adjudicate. You decide the case. I wasn't overturned on appeal.
That's it. Yes, you weren't overturned on appeal.
Yeah,
Yes,
I'm proud of my record in terms of appeals. But you do the best you can with the evidence you've got. I'm not saying that I didn't make decisions that were wrong. I think I would be foolish to think that after 26 years of doing thousands of cases that I didn't get it wrong. I probably did. I can only say I did my best with the evidence that was presented before me. Did I always get all of the evidence? No. Sometimes it's he said, she said. That's all you've got. Most people don't commit a sexual assault in front of a bunch of witnesses. There are lots of offenses that happen with just the offender and the victim. And in the end, it depends on who you believe. And I could be wrong, but I did my best. That's all I can say. So I left that job after 26 years at the age of 65 years old, feeling that was I the best judge? No. But I certainly had a track record that I am proud of.
What's curious to me is that, again, you said that one of the reasons that you believe you did so well in the way that you did well is because you would interview witnesses. You wouldn't talk down to them. You wouldn't talk over them. We find very often in Judaism that we're always sort of splitting the law, breaking it down, rebuilding it. We're doing a lot of lawful stuff, but it's not for the people. It's for the cerebral. Whereas you were very much in touch with human beings in your court, and that translated into your new career as an interviewer.
Well, there are a number of colleagues. I wasn't a big fan of my colleagues. I'll tell you that. There are too many judges who, in my opinion, are more interested in being elevated to a higher court than they are in really connecting with the people who come in front of them. So if your focus is on writing erudite, lengthy, epic decisions, who are you writing for? Most of the people that appeared in front of us, if they read your judgment at all, they're going to go to the last page to see what the decision was. But if you're writing because you want the publishers to publish your decision and you want to show what a great scholar you are so you can be elevated to the Court of Appeal, that's not me. I wanted the people who appeared in front of me to know that I cared and that I was listening to them. And I wanted, even if they lost, I wanted them to know that at least they were heard, that I understood what they were saying. And if I ruled against them, I wanted them to know why. I gave them my reasons. Did that help me as an interviewer? Yeah, I think the reason my show took off, because remember, it was only a hobby. I only did this as a hobby. I started it when I was 65 because I knew I wanted to do something with my time after retiring. I don't have children. I don't have grandchildren. I don't have siblings or nieces or nephews. I knew I needed something to do. And so this was only going to be a hobby, but I believe the reason the show really took off and that the Hollywood community embraced me the way they have is because my interviews are different. I do my research and I ask questions that these people have not been asked before. And that's what you have to do if you want to attract an audience. And if you want to get the best guests, you can't just ask the same questions. I can't ask Robert Wagner, oh, so did you kill your wife?
Right.
That's, or Barbara Streisand. So what was it like to work with Robert Redford in The Way We Were? She's been asked that a million times. They don't want those kinds of questions, and the public doesn't want to listen to that again. So you got to work hard. And I think my time as a judge prepared me for that.
It was very cool with Robert Wagner. I was wondering if you would get around at any point to his wife, who died, some people would argue suspiciously, on a boat that they were on. And clearly you couldn't ask that. That would be inappropriate. I believe so too. But what you did say to him was, there are those people who said, RJ, that you were a star even before you were an actor. And he kind of laughed and he said, yeah, that was my wife, my wife who passed away. So you actually did bring her into the interview. I thought that was very cool.
Yeah, and I asked him about his current wife, Jill St. John, who, by the way, is Jewish.
She is Jewish?
Yeah. Jill St. John is a stage name, but his wife is Jewish, and she makes a very good matzo ball soup, I can tell you.
Oh, you know that?
Yes, I do. So
Yeah.
I did ask him about Jill, and then he spoke about what he went through after Natalie died. I'm sorry that people feel she died under suspicious circumstances. That death has been investigated up and down the yin yang. There is nothing suspicious about it. He writes a whole chapter in his book about exactly what happened. He's told the police a million times. Anybody who knows RJ, and I am a very good friend of his, we speak at least twice a week. Anyone who knows him knows that he could never possibly have done that.
Yes.
And if he'd wanted to end that marriage, he didn't have to kill her to do that. So that's just not. It's very unfortunate that anyone would think that, because I would put my life on it. He never would do such a thing. Never.
I, by the way, for the record, wasn't suggesting that he had. It's just, Harvey, and you know this probably better than most, having been a judge. Narratives stick. Some guy is on the front page of the Toronto Star for something that he had done purportedly, God forbid, to a child, and then it's proven that that wasn't the case at all. And then you find on, the 12th page, a little paragraph that says, we were wrong, we're correcting. Like, narratives stick. That was my point.
Narratives do stick, and that's why the use of the term occupied territories,
Yes,
that the label of Israel as occupiers, has stuck. And I'm sorry to say that I think Israel has lost the PR war. They probably lost it long before October 7th. But yes, you're right. Narratives stick. And I've seen it in my court. If you're charged with a sexual offense and you're found not guilty, the good example would be Kevin Spacey.
yes.
Kevin Spacey was acquitted. He'll never work again. Doesn't matter.
Yes.
That's the way it is. And it's sad. And I was very mindful of that when I was a judge. I knew that the criminal justice system is brutal. Just the power of the state to charge you. Another good example, Jan Gomeshi from CBC here in Canada was charged with sexual assault. He was acquitted. I don't think anybody's heard of him going back into show business.
No.
His career, he didn't recover, but he was found not guilty. Yeah, O.J. Simpson was found not guilty. I think most of the world thinks he was guilty. And I don't know if he was, but I can tell you that you're right. Narratives stick.
Yeah. Harvey, when I was growing up, and my mother was born in 1930, so she was a great, great lover of the oldies, of the actors and actresses who were in the days of the flamboyant and the romantic, and the songs, the musicals that came out of that. She would take us to all those plays and theater. And again, she would introduce us to some stunning, stunning movies on TV, which we still watch today, I believe on Channel 48, the oldies. So when I went through the whole litany of interviews that you've done, and you've done 350, I believe, in the last 3 years, as they say in Hebrew, kol hakavod to you. Well done. That's outstanding.
Thank you.
Outstanding. It's a lot of work, especially for the research you put in. Are you seduced by that sort of era and the beautiful, flowing dresses, and the men, the garbos who would dress in the top hats and the beautiful coats, and the way they spoke? Is that what drew you into those type of interviews?
Absolutely. That's the golden age of Hollywood. My childhood was a nightmare. I mean, just my only goal every day was to get into the school building without getting beaten up, and to get home after class without getting beaten up. So when I was in front of the television watching those old black and white movies where everything was wonderful, everybody was beautiful, everybody was kind to everyone else. I mean, not every movie. There were obviously gangster movies and that kind of thing. But I was watching I Love Lucy, I fantasized that I was little Ricky, that Lucy was my mother, and that everything was great. And you'd watch Lassie and Rin Tin Tin and The Wizard of Oz and any movie that had kids in it. You put yourself in that position. So for me, show business, Hollywood was an escape. That was where I felt safe and happy. And it took me away from the real nightmare that I went through as a kid going to school. Now, things got better. They did get better because I finally learned how to deal with it. I learned how to be funny. I became the comedian. If they're laughing at you, they won't beat you up. Well, and if you give them your lunch money, that helps too. And if you do their homework, that'll make you popular too. So I found tools by the time I got to high school, but Hollywood for sure was my escape. Absolutely.
And today, I understand the romanticism as a child because I felt the same way. And I remember watching Lucille Ball on TV and thinking, this is so beautiful. I wish my life was more like this. But for that half hour, you would go into that world and it would be magnificent. When you interview some of those stars from today or their children, of which you do, and you do so well, is that do the same feelings come out, or have you developed a different relationship with it?
No, those feelings come out. I have to tell you, Avram, that when I interviewed Lucille Ball's daughter, that was a real pinch me moment. Lucille
Yes.
Ball was I thought she was my friend.
Yes.
I adored her. And of course she was gone. I had to laugh. At the end of the interview, Lucy Arnaz said to me, "Oh my God, you should have started this sooner. My mother would have loved you. I wish you had interviewed my mother." And I
Yes.
said, "Lucy, I could only do this once they invented Zoom. I couldn't have done it when your mother was alive. There was no Zoom.
Yeah.
Zoom really created the possibility to do what you and I are doing now. And it gave me the opportunity to do my show. And unfortunately, by then, many of my favorite classic stars like Jimmy Stewart and Cary Grant and all those people were gone. But for those that are around or for their children, absolutely, I do have that feeling. I am so thrilled that the closest I could ever get to Lucille Ball was to interview her daughter.
Yes.
And I got to do it. And I got to tell her how much her mother meant to me.
What did you tell her? What did you tell her, Harvey?
I told her how deeply, profoundly important that humor was for me as a kid. There were nights I went to bed at night praying that there had been a mistake at the hospital and that I really was little Ricky, and that one day Lucy and Desi were going to come and get me.
Yes.
That they were going to come and rescue me. That's how strong it was. And I remember in grade 6, my teacher said, "Harvey, what you're watching on I Love Lucy are reruns. Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz are divorced. They're not together anymore. And those shows are all old reruns." Well, I almost had a nervous breakdown. I couldn't believe it. I didn't understand that this wasn't happening now. So, that was one of those life lessons.
Well, what other pinch me moments have you had through your interviews?
Pinch me moments. Well, when Robert Wagner told me I gave him the best interview of his life, this is a man who's been a star for 70 years. Mm-hmm. Pat Boone just did the same thing. He's 90 years old. Pat Boone said, "You're the best." Anytime I get a celebrity, and we've had many of them say, "There's just nobody like you. Nobody's done what you've done. Nobody's asked me these questions. Nobody knows my career as well as you." Those are pinch me moments for sure. And there've been dozens of them. And I think the audience loves it too, because I get so many comments from people saying, "Oh my God, I love to see what they say about you." I never wanted the show to be about me, but for some reason, the audience really loves if the guest tells the interviewer how great they are. So I'm going to tell you, Avrum, I think you're terrific. You're doing a wonderful job.
Thank you. Is not to be too much of an armchair analyst, although I purport to be sometimes. I know what it feels like that compliment you just gave me. I appear to be very humble about it. Trust me, You've made my week.
Well,
I
you
was
deserve it. You've done a wonderful job. I can see from the questions you're asking me that you went to the trouble to look at some of my interviews that I've given and to look at my show. And I don't take that for granted. I appreciate it. I've done a lot of interviews, and I've had some guests, I've had some podcasters actually ask me in advance, what questions should I ask you? Could you please
yes,
give me the questions?
yes,
Which is
yes.
beyond incompetent. And I've also come on some shows where the interviewer starts by saying, "So Harvey, tell us a little bit about yourself. What is it that you
Uh,
do?"
uh, worst,
So
worst.
when I tell you that you're good, I
Thank
mean
you.
it. I
Thank you.
mean it.
So Harvey, I want to tell you something, and this is going to be a question. Asking a question in a Jewish way. I wanted you to like me because I've looked at your body of work, and to me, it's magnificent what you've accomplished, really. And I'm not being obsequious. I think you're very American living in Canada. You have that type A spirit, and you've done so much for our planet, for people. And I know the poor. I know that community, and I understand what you're saying when you say that they stand in front of you and you try to be as compassionate as possible. I wanted to be liked by you because of your expertise and what you've done. When Robert Wagner says this is the greatest interview that I've ever had in my entire 7 years, is that another way of being liked? Do you want to be liked by them?
Well, first of all, I do like you. I
Thank you.
liked you
Thank you.
before I even met you because I think you do a great job on your show.
Thank you.
And I think I wanted to be liked by an audience. I wanted to see if I could find my niche. I wanted to see if anybody would watch my show. About 6 months into the show, we hit 1 million viewers, and I was stunned. That really mattered to me, that people appreciated what I do. And then over the course of the first year, I began to get guests not only telling me that they really liked what I did, but wanting to stay in touch, wanting to become my friend, wanting to get me their friends to come on the show. Because many of the stars who've come on our show came to us from other stars who said, you've got to go on this guy's show. He's amazing. So when that happened, I realized they liked me. And it does matter. Of course it does. Of course it does. Because these are people I've admired my whole life, And so, for example, let's see, who's a good one? Tony Tennille, the Captain and Tennille. I
Captain and Teal.
loved her voice. I loved her music.
Yes.
I loved Joan Van Ark on Knots Landing. I loved Linda Gray on Dallas, Linda Evans on Dynasty. We've had all these people on the show. If you love their work and then they tell you, you're my friend, when you're in Los Angeles, call me, let's get together. And I do. It's a tremendous feeling because these are celebrities who have a lot of people trying to get to them. And somehow they sense that I'm a real fan. I'm not doing this for the money. And I'm not doing this to become famous myself. I'm a real fan. And I ask them questions because I think I'm asking what the fans want to hear. And they seem to pick up on that. And I do appreciate being liked, for sure.
When you lie in bed in the wee hours of the night, when you think about your successes, do you think to yourself, damn, this is a shitload away, far, far away from being beat up in my schoolyard? Look where I've arrived at. Do you pat yourself on the back?
I feel that I haven't accomplished all that much. I'm proud of the fact that I was a good lawyer. And I'm proud that I got myself appointed to the bench at a time when everyone said it couldn't be done. And I'm proud that as a judge, I distinguished myself by writing a best-selling book. I had a television show. No other judge has ever done that while they're still sitting. I'm proud of all that. And I have to say, and then as far as the show goes, I'm thrilled that people like what I do. I'm delighted at the success we've had. We're televised in the UK. We're number 12 in the world.
Yeah.
Stars are clamoring to come on the show now. I have a manager in Hollywood working on a number of very interesting development deals in Los Angeles. Yes, I've come a long way from when I was beat up. Yes, I'll tell you something. I was terrible at phys ed. phys ed class for me was the worst, because I would be mercilessly teased in the locker room. By the way, when I was in school, I never went to the men's room. I never went to the washroom because I was so badly beat up that I'd have to hold it all day till I got home. So that was awful. But anyway, one day in phys ed class, everybody had to do a routine on the parallel bars. Every single person. And this was a nightmare for me. When it got to be my turn, that's what you call a depends moment. It was really, and I couldn't do anything. And the whole class laughed. And the teacher, God bless him, said to the students, you see this kid here? One day he's going to achieve more than all of you put together.
Yeah.
You remember my words, because this kid who doesn't know how to do anything on the parallel bars is going to outshine all of you. I guarantee it. And that stuck with me. I thought, well, he sees something in me. You know, I'm not athletic. And yeah, I'm obviously queer. But he sees something in me. And I think maybe I'll find a way to find what I am good at. And then I will be a success. So when I lie in bed, I do think back to that moment. I think, well, I did go to the 25th anniversary of my high school reunion. And I saw all of those bullies who, by the way, had big pot bellies.
Yeah.
They looked like shit. Most of them had achieved nothing significant. And I was a judge. And so it did feel good. I think success is the best revenge. And that's the best way to heal from that kind of pain. Be the biggest success you can be, because that's the best revenge.
Did you approach any of the bullies?
A couple of them came up to me. I hear you're a judge now. I said, oh, you heard right. But no, I didn't approach any of them, but a couple of them, most of them stayed away, but a couple of them came up to me. Nobody said, congratulations or I'm sorry or anything like that. But they did, they certainly knew Harvey. I grew up in Hamilton. I grew up in a tough neighborhood. For that milieu, I was a star. I was a judge. Yes. So they knew. It felt good.
Yeah, well, fuck them, Harvey. Fuck them. So in terms of your interviews, you do stars. You do many, many stars. But you also do the Tim Malachowskis of the world. And Tim was the assistant, Mae West's assistant.
Yeah.
Do you interview him because of Mae West, or do you want to know who he is?
No, because of Mae West.
And do you get to know who he is? And are you satisfied? Well, that's an interesting fellow.
Yes, of course, because the same thing with Betty Davis's assistant, who's become a very dear friend, Catherine Cermak.
Yes.
These are people who worked very closely with legendary stars who are no longer with us. There is no one else you can talk to that will know them quite that well. And so you get to know them too, because you want to find out, what is it about you that this star saw in you to keep you in their entourage at such an intimate level and for so long? And what have you done since they've died to perpetrate their legacy, to honor their careers? And so, and that's true of the children too. Audrey Hepburn's son is a wonderful man, spoke so beautifully. Peggy Lee's granddaughter, who runs her estate, beautiful person, does a wonderful job. Boris Karloff's daughter, Sarah. We've had Errol Flynn's daughter came on our show. She never gives interviews. Hedy Lamarr, who was also Jewish, her son came on the show. He never gives interviews. I'm very honored when we get the children of people who, are great legends, and they're very protective of their parents' legacies, and they don't give interviews unless they're satisfied it's going to be something very respectable. Dean Martin's daughter, I mentioned Lucille Ball. We've had many, many children of stars, and it's a great honor. It's a great responsibility. And I love getting to know them, and they often become friends. That's a real byproduct of what I do, that a lot of these people become your friends. They stay in touch.
Were the children at all broigus with their parents, by and large? Were they upset with them. My father was a rabbi. I mentioned that. He wasn't home. He was so much more into the congregants than me. Um, I suspect Lucille Ball's daughter, Errol Flynn's son, I suspect that they didn't see their parents enough.
Yes, I think that's very true. And I think that those who wanted a show business career themselves, like Lucille Ball's daughter, had a rough time. The only one, I think, who managed to eclipse her mother and become just as big a star was Liza Minnelli. But Dean Martin's daughter, who is a singer, Frank Sinatra's daughter, Nancy, you have, and of course, Frank Sinatra Jr., and you have so many other children of stars who wanted to be in the business themselves and never, ever were able to get out from under that shadow. That was hard. Is it Brueges in the sense of bad feeling? Certainly when I interviewed Gary Lewis, his father was Jerry Lewis, the comedian. That's a very, very interesting interview if you're an armchair analyst, as you are.
Yes.
Because I asked him, did your father ever tell you he was proud of you? And I won't spoil it for people, but if you watch that interview with Gary Lewis, it's painful, really painful. And there's a lot of things have been said about Jerry Lewis and what kind of a person he was, especially near the end. But he talks very openly about his father. So those that wanted a show business career, I think they had a rough time. But those that didn't go into show business, those who decided to do other things, they had an easier time.
So, Harvey, you'll go out on a limb and ask a child of a star, did your parents ever tell you they love you or were they proud of you? You'll go out on that limb, eh?
Yes, but you have to know when to do it.
Right. At what point in the interview?
You have to, as you've done, you have to develop a rapport. You have to make them feel comfortable. You have to make them feel they're in a safe place. And then you trust your gut, your instincts. And again, that comes from my many years in a courtroom. You have to decide, is this okay to say? You know, now if I were interviewing Robert Wagner, being one of his close friends now, I would say to him, how do you feel about the fact that some people still think you killed your wife? Now I would be able to ask that question, but I could never have asked that when I first interviewed him because we had only had one conversation before he came on the show. And I just didn't feel that I had that kind of rapport with him.
As an interviewer, what happens inside of me, and I'm curious if this happens inside of you, is I ask you a question and then I listen to your answer. While you're answering me, I do my very, very best to concentrate on what you're saying. And I try to pick up on a nuance and then have that lead into the next question. What's your process?
I have a blueprint that I've prepared, and then I do exactly what you do, which is what I call a follow-up question. But I have a blueprint. Sometimes if the guest has rambled on and really gone way off track, I simply move on. Because the interview, I've only been given so much time. And when you're dealing with celebrities, their time is very limited. And I have a number of questions I want to get through, so I don't follow up. I want to keep going because I want to make sure I get all my questions in. Other times, if I can see that they're very relaxed, they're not in a rush, I will follow up. It's very interesting what can happen. When I had Marie Osmond on the show,
yes,
who was lovely, I was told at least 100 times by her manager, you have 15 minutes, not 1 minute more. She's fully booked, 15 minutes. So we're going on to we're doing the interview. We're getting along really well. The 15 minutes comes along. The manager says, time to stop. And she said, back off. I like this guy. I'm having a good time. I don't care if we're running behind. I want to keep going. That's solid gold. Solid gold. And so we got 35 minutes out of her. Same thing happened with Taylor Dane. I was told 15 minutes.
yes.
She went on for 40 minutes. You have to hope that you've built some kind of a rapport and they see how good you are. they see that this is not the typical boilerplate, run-of-the-mill interview, that you're really good at what you're doing, and they're enjoying it, and they want to keep going. When I had Pat Boone on, his manager said to me, look, he's 90 years old. He's just done a 45-minute interview. So I don't know how much koiches this guy has to keep going. So I thought, oh boy, because I had like 8 pages of questions.
Yeah.
Well, he got into it so much, he talked for 2.5 hours, and we had to edit out a whole bunch of stuff because it just went on too long. So you never know. But the more you do this, the more they find out who you are before you even meet them, the easier it gets. You know, when I first started, we would go on Zoom, and the first thing the celebrity would say is, how long is this going to take? Like, not even hello. They don't know who the hell I am. They just want to get this over with. Now I go on Zoom and they say, oh, Harvey, it's such an honor. Everyone in Hollywood is talking about you. I'm so thrilled to be on your show.
Yeah, I heard that. Yes.
It's a big, big difference. And that came from a lot of hard work, a lot of networking, a lot of trying to deliver great interviews so that these stars, when they talk to each other, they mention me, and that they will come into the interview already very much looking forward to it. And I'm very proud that I'm at that stage now where they all say, oh, I've been looking forward to this. I can't wait to see what you're going to ask me.
Wonderful.
You know, so I must be doing something right. I pinch myself every day that I found a way to make this into a career when it was just supposed to be a hobby, and we'll see where it goes.
Harvey, being sensitive to your time, I just have a couple more questions. One is about research. When I finish a podcast, Sundays normally, I take Monday off and I clear my head. Tuesday, I start diving into my next guest's life. So, knowing that I would be interviewing you probably last Tuesday or Wednesday, I started reading up on you. And I went on YouTube and I listened to many of your interviews, some which I was so attracted to, which were just outstanding. And I tried to gather as much information about you so that when I was sitting across from you, as it would be, that I had a sense that I knew you already, and I knew the first few minutes we'd have to get to know each other. But if everything went well, because of the research that I had done, that you would appreciate that and we would move forward. I've heard you say in interviews, when I was reading your book, so I'm always curious about other interviewers, like how much of that book would you read?
The
How much
whole thing.
you would actually read the whole book?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. If they're on the show to promote a book, it's my responsibility to read the whole thing because I want to do a thorough job.
Yeah.
And so now if they're on the show and their book came out 10 years ago, they're not really there to promote the book anymore. But that book is a memoir that's going to give me their perspective on their own life. I would be a moron not to read the book. It's the best source of questions. So I read every book that my guests have written because I need to know where they're coming from so I can give them an interview that will be different from everybody else's.
You use a highlighter?
No, I have a notepad. And as I'm reading the book, I kind of read a book like I'm studying for an exam. I'm writing down questions that I will ask. I'm writing down quotes from the book that I want to read back to them. Often one of my Harvey isms is that I will say, let me read you something that you wrote in your book. And then I'll read them 3 or 4 lines. And then I'll say, what did you mean by that? That's a big Harvey ism.
It's an Avrumism too, by the way.
Yeah. So, you've got to read, it depends what you want. Sometimes I think a lot of these podcasters out there are doing this because they want to be famous, or they want a chance to talk to somebody famous, or they just think it's fun and they don't put any work into their podcasts. Then fine. They're not going to do that. They're not going to get famous people. because famous people don't have time for that. But if you want to really make it, if you want to get the A-listers, you better do your homework. They're not idiots, and they talk, and they all have managers and publicists. So if you've done a mediocre job with a celebrity, that celebrity's publicist will tell all the other publicists you're no good and you won't get anywhere. And now that I saw that I could actually make this into a career, I want to be good. I want my stars that come on my show to tell me that I gave them the best interview of their lives, because that's how you get better, bigger celebrities.
Are you ever nervous
Yes, every time.
because of the star level or because this is a tough job?
Because I don't know these people. I've never met them. I don't know what to expect. I don't know what they've heard about me. I don't know how much time they're going to have. Sometimes I'm nervous because they're very elderly and I don't know if they know how to use Zoom.
Yes.
You know, we have people like Mamie Van Doren, who was one of the first Hollywood blonde bombshells, was 92. And I didn't know if she'd be able to handle Zoom. You know, Little Anthony from Little Anthony of the Imperials, he had a terrible time dealing with Zoom. We were half an hour talking him through it on the phone, trying to get his microphone to work and his speaker to work. And so I'm nervous about the technical stuff. I'm worried about whether my questions will be well received. Yeah, I'm nervous.
Harvey, we've talked a lot about your upbringing and some very difficult times that you've gone through, and of course, some wonderful successes. We've talked about your empathy for the families who have stood before you in family court, some of the children whom you've met over the years. I like very much in my show to finish things off with a really positive message to our viewers, many of whom are struggling tremendously in life for various different reasons. Some of them who are younger, some of them who are older. Perhaps you can conclude our interview with a message to folks about how you've achieved what you've achieved, what they can do in order to find their gift from within, their talent, to pursue life with a vengeance. Is that appropriate?
Sure. I think that if I've learned anything in life that I can convey to other people, it's number one, don't define yourself by what other people think of you. It's hard when you hear other people's opinions, including family and parents, that are not reflective of who you think you are, who you want to be. But you have to develop resilience in life in order to create an identity for yourself that you're happy with, and then pursue it despite what anybody else may tell you about what you are or are not good enough for. That's number one. Number two, always, always trust your instincts. I am a very intuitive person. I knew when it was time to tell my parents that I was gay. I knew how to handle the aftermath. I knew how to survive the 5 years that I went through to get to become a lawyer by following my instincts. I knew when it was the right time to apply to be a judge. I knew while I was a judge when it was the right time to release a book, which was not ever done, certainly not a book intended for the public. I knew when it was the right time to do a television show when I was offered. I knew what kind of format to do that would not get me in trouble as a judge. All of that. And then, of course, the decision to retire, which everyone told me I was crazy to retire, to launch a podcast on YouTube. People thought I was nuts. But your instincts will never, ever be wrong if you can peel away the layers of what everybody else thinks, what everybody else wants you to do, and get to that little voice inside you. That's the voice of God talking to you, telling you what's right for you. And if you follow that, you will never be wrong. And that's the advice I give young people all the time.
Harvey Brownstone, thank you so much for being my guest today. It was just magnificent. I loved it. Absolutely loved it.
Well, Avram, you did an amazing job.
Thank you.
I've given at least 100 interviews over the last 3 years. You are absolutely the best.
Thank you.
Your research, your compassion, your sense of when to follow up, when to keep going. You are a pro, and it was a thrill to be on your
Oh,
show.
thank you. Thank you. I and trust me, I'm taking that with me when the show's over. So thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. In conclusion, my friends, I'd just like to add to what Harvey was saying is this is a show about people whom I find just magnificent, who are very inspiring. Listen very closely to what they have to say because I know so many people who are having such a tough time in life. We can learn so much from so many. In fact, in Perkei Avot, which is Ethics of Our Fathers, it's sort of self-help within Judaism, it says, Ezu Chacham, who is a wise person? Lomed Mikal Adam, somebody who learns from everybody. Okay? So listen closely to what people have to say. Go through this interview and follow what Harvey was talking about when he spoke about, moving up the ranks in life, despite the fact that he had been so put upon by so many. He said, screw this, I'm going to do it anyways. And by all means, be in touch with me if you like. If you'd like to talk about this concept, this idea, if you need some encouragement, you can find me at avram.rosensweig@gmail.com or at my website, avramrosensweig.com. I would be more than happy to talk to you. Life is short, but it is truly, truly lovely. And there is so much out there for all of us. So grab onto it. Just grab onto it and make it the very best you can. I want to thank you very much for being part of this again. Today, Harvey Brownstone. Am Yisrael Achai, the nation of Israel lives. We look forward to being with you again next week when we talk to another very inspiring guest. Have a great day, and we will talk to you soon.